What's up, guys? Welcome back to the library. We are finally back to the Professor Bourbon podcast after a few weeks off due to some traveling and some things like that. Professor Bourbon, how are we doing tonight?
Oh, doing excellent. It's great to be back. It's been quite some time. We've had a lot of trips. I've been down to see the scout and the class, and traveled a few thousand miles since we were last here, and have a few bottles and a few stories to show for it.
Yeah, you've definitely picked up a lot of bourbon, not only from your trip down here, but several trips in between. I know we have a ton to talk about, so we can go ahead and just ask, what's in your glass tonight, Professor Bourbon?
Tonight is one of the things I got in on one of my trips in downtown Louisville. The Bardstown Bourbon Company just opened I think they call it the Bardstown Tasting Experience, but it's right there on Whiskey Row, and they have, in addition to their kind of normal things in the Origin series, they have some single barrels that you can only get there. And so what I'm drinking is one. They had only 3 left, and it didn't take me much to talk me into buying something from Bardstown. But I got what they call Bardstown Single Barrel Fresh Pop. That's 120 proof, aged 6 years, and it's a 4-grain bourbon. It's got 60 corn, 26, I believe it is, rye, 10 wheat, and 4 barley for the mash bill, 4% barley. And it is quintessential Bardstown. Bardstown never disappoints. A lot of chocolate, a lot of baking, just nice, warm, inviting, wonderful, kind of dark colored, nice legs bourbon. It's really excellent. And I just happened to go into on a rainy morning, riding a scooter. We'll talk more about this, into the Bardstown Tasting Experience, and found this one. So how about you? What do you got? What are you sipping?
I have the little brother almost of what you have over there. So I have the Bardstown, just the original Origin series, standard white label, 96 proof. But if you can find it for the price that this one goes for, I think it's about 40 or 45 bucks MSRP. It is such an easy drinking pour, 96 proof. See, yours even looks like the better version Big Brother with the gold label and things like
Same
that.
color and everything.
Exactly. So I don't really think they make a bad product at Bardstown. So anytime that you can try one of their products, it's usually going to be a good pour. So what have you found on the scouting report over your travels, all the miles, all the cities you've seen? Let's see a couple of the bottles. We'll just stick with a couple for tonight, but let's see a couple that you picked up on the travels.
So on the travels, we can kind of go back. It'd be hard for me to hold them all up from the Louisville trip. So let's talk. We can talk a little bit about those, but we can talk about some other trips that were kind of some weird places to find some stuff. But after my Louisville trip, where I picked up, we'll talk when we get to that trip. We'll talk more about these barrels. My next trip was to Huntsville, Alabama. I'm sorry, Huntsville, Texas, not Alabama. I always do that. Huntsville, Texas, and a little known a little known fact, or a factoid about Huntsville. Huntsville is home of the notorious Walls unit of the Huntsville Texas State Penitentiary, which is home to the most active execution chamber in the United States. And they have executed 586 prisoners since 1982. So the hotel I stayed at, which was on the campus of Sam Houston State University, was 1 block from the prison. So I figured I was safe there, because if you were going to run away from that prison, you weren't going to stop at the hotel. And there I walked into a liquor store. I want to give a shout out to Lone Star Liquor. If you're ever in Huntsville, Texas, please hit up Lone Star Liquor. I walked in a little tiny liquor store. Nice gentleman is sitting behind the counter, pretty obviously the owner, and I kind of walk in, look around, and I tell him thank you, because just about everything he has out there, I have. And by the way, if you're looking for Weller Special Reserve, you could get it from the nip bottle to the 375 to the 750 to the full liter, and you could carry out as much as you could put in your arms out of this store. I have never seen so much Weller Special Reserve in my life. But we were I walked in and I told them thank you. I'm out from out of town, and every time I go into a new town, I look and see if they got anything. I told them a little bit about the library. Told them I was at that point was pushing 400 bottles. I think we've gone up over the 415 mark now. And he goes and he reaches and he goes, hey, wait a minute. He reaches down behind the counter and he pulls this out. And for those of you who are listening, I'll read what this is in a second. He pulls this out and he goes, oh, so you'll know about this. And what he pulls out, for those of you who can't see, is a very old St. Nick ancient cask bourbon Immaculata. And I was like, yeah, I know about that. And he says, well, I bought this for a customer, and I was going to charge him $280 for it. And I'm thinking, okay. And I'm about to say, I'll take it. And he says, I got $210 in it. I just want my money back. And I said, done. And I don't know that you can see on here, but I didn't have any problem having a good chunk of it. And I think we'll have this posted up on the TikTok and the Instagram soon, and all my tasting notes and my score. But boy, oh boy, was this a very good find and a real good bottle in Huntsville, Texas. Again, shout out to Lone Star Liquor if you're ever at Lone Star Liquor.
Shout out Lone Star Liquor.
Shout out Lone Star Liquor. I'm not sure they have a web presence, but just in case they do, shout out. Next time I'm in Huntsville, Texas, I will certainly go back by there and say hello. And he gave me a pretty good recommendation for some barbecue. So that worked out really well too. It's, Texas is obviously the home of the barbecue. So, and then I'm trying to remember, where did I go after Huntsville, Texas? I think I went to, by the way, while I was in Huntsville, so we're talking about Huntsville, a friend of mine, we'll call him a junior scout, found out some stuff in Evansville, Indiana. When we get the scouting report, I'll show you what the junior scout found me. A couple of my junior scouts, you're the senior scout always, but a couple of junior scouts found some stuff for me all over the country. But then I was in, of all places, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania last week, which is home of rye country. And I walked into a liquor store in Pittsburgh, and I was thinking, let me see what they got. I walk over to the store on the south of Pittsburgh, walked across the river, went to the liquor store, and was poking around and was almost going to give up on bourbon. I was going to get a Your Dad's Hat rye, because that's from Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania's kind of the birth of whiskey in the U.S. You may not know that, but Pennsylvania kind of is where the birth of whiskey started, largely out of the rye grain. And whiskey kind of started because grain will spoil. So if you're a farmer and you have grain left over, it's going to spoil. But alcohol doesn't spoil. So if you turn your grain into whiskey, you get to keep the grain in a smaller container with more, the same or more value. And then grain started, and whiskey actually served as forms of money back then. And one of the great episodes of the U.S. history is the Whiskey Rebellion, which was a rebellion against the tax that I believe it was George Washington put in place on whiskey things. Maybe we'll do a little podcast on the Whiskey Rebellion at some point on in this. But so Pennsylvania might be, and it's going to depend on who you talk to, might be the origin of whiskey in the U.S. thanks to its rye, the growing of its rye grain. And that's why when you're in Pennsylvania, you're looking for rye. You're not looking for bourbon like you are in Kentucky, because Kentucky obviously grew corn better than rye because of for lots of reasons, soil and stuff. So when I was in there, Kentucky, I was looking through. I was about to leave, and I looked over at a shelf, and there was the bourbon named after who some people claim was the first bourbon producer ever in the U.S., and all these stories are kind of interesting, and that would be Elijah Craig. And I looked over, and there was an Elijah Craig A124 for retail, which is, nowadays the barrel proof releases are difficult to find. And I got it for retail, and this one a lot of people don't seem to like, and they're kind of bummed out that it's not 11-year or 12-year. It's 10 years and 9 months, 119 proof. I enjoyed it. I don't think it's as good as the releases from last year, but I don't think it's anything you should turn your nose up at. And if you If you find a A124, I think I gave it a B in the rankings. I think that one will pop up on Instagram at some point as well. So those are some of the things that I got from some weird places. And then while I was down visiting the Scout, we got a unicorn. I got this old Rip 10, and we, as they say in air quotes, won a lottery. One of those lotteries where you spend money and you get your name in the lottery, and apparently we spent the right amount of money to have our lottery have a sticky pad stuck on it so that when they reached in and grabbed our name, it stuck to his hand. And thanks to the Scout more than anything for that. So we've added the old Rip 10 to the lot B on top, and we're filling out our old our Pappy collection. So that's kind of fun. And we did a blind on that over Christmas, and we both, I think, decided that at that time, the old Rip 10 we preferred to the lot B.
Yeah.
So you never know. And those are the kind of the couple of weird things that I picked up in places that you wouldn't expect to pick things up. Obviously, if I'm in Louisville, I expect to pick up something pretty damn good in Louisville, right? But when you're in Huntsville, Texas, home of the most active execution chamber in the country, you don't expect to see really good bourbon, maybe good barbecue, but not really good bourbon. So those are kind of some of the things that I picked up, and we can talk about some of the other stuff that other people have picked up for me here in a minute. But what you been looking at?
Unfortunately, down here on the south side, we haven't had a lot of action. I'm going to start hitting the stores here again pretty soon now that all the allocations have kind of been taken care of at the beginning of the year. We're starting to see some more of the, standard staples show up on shelves. So the Scouts got to get back out there and start watching some film. So I've been slacking. I've been slacking a little bit on this side, but we're going to pick it up here moving into spring. But what have you been reading this week? Anything interesting that Professor Bourbon's seen on the news articles or in a podcast? Just seeing what's happening in the bourbon world this week.
Yeah, and real quick, I forgot to give a shout out to the tap house down there in where is that? It's not in Peachtree. It's
Fairburn, Georgia.
Say hi, hello to my grandson. This is Brendan. Say
what's
hi,
up, Brendan?
Ask Brendan, what does this smell like, dude?
Popcorn.
He says the and that's funny because what did we call this one? It was fresh pop, and he says it smells like popcorn.
He's a natural.
So he's a natural. All right.
What do I smell like?
Fruit. Stone fruit with a little dark cherry, maybe some brown sugar. All right, bud. See ya.
Our first official guest on the Professor Bourbon podcast.
There you go. First guest. So give a shout out to the tap house. I met I forgot his name now. Pre, and he gave me he had held a bottle back for me, a nice Elijah Craig single barrel that I really enjoyed, and I think we'll see that one on the TikTok and the Instagram too, and the tasting notes on that one. So I really enjoyed that one. I picked up a couple of other things there. We can talk about it some other point, but what did I read? What have I seen? I saw this really interesting article in titled "How Michigan Lost $1 Million of Liquor." Sadly, not by drinking it. The government lost a fifth of the state's inventory. So Michigan is one of, I think it's 17 states that are control states. So Michigan, and we know there's for some of you that don't know, sometime in 2022, late 2022, the Virginia Alcoholic Beverage Commission, my home state, the Virginia ABC, Alcohol Beverage Control Authority, have lotteries for allocated things, and then have deliveries that they do these text drops or an email drops, and you can run to the store and buy what's there. Well, there was somebody on the inside tipping collectors off that were buying the stuff and flipping it and giving back some of the vig back to the guys that were tipping them off. And last year you had Oregon's Liquor and Cannabis Commission were busted, not for tipping people off, but the commissioners were pulling back and holding back the the commissioner just happened to end up with the lot B or the Old Rip 23 or the birthday bourbon or the I just lost it, but whatever it was in there, happened to manage to get those things. So now the latest one is the in an audit, according to the Michigan Liquor Commission, they lost 63,000 or 62,294 bottles of liquor that were worth almost $10 million. So they said they had, and there's another part of the report where the agency purchased 12,204 bottles of a particular spirit, and only 1,100 of it were sold in that week. And they kept 11,000 bottles on that for the next 48 weeks. And there were no sales of it. So they purchased another 780 of something else. So the beauty of the government in taking care of liquor, they lost 62,000 bottles of liquor. That's even more than I got in the library, for God's sake. I mean, that's a lot of liquor. I'd feel bad if I lost one of these and they lost 62,000 of them. Like I said, I'm not real good at ciphering, but I think that's like 120,000 times the size of the library. But that's a pretty amazing amount to lose.
Yeah, from what I've seen in the article, they hire like third-party warehousing to keep these bottles that they purchase to then redistribute to the state. And somehow I saw one thing that was like 20% of every bottle that they had collected vanished within a month. From January of 2022 to February of 2022, 20% of the bottles had mysteriously disappeared. And these audits that they're supposed to be running of inventory, I think like monthly, they hadn't been doing since 2019, which, of course, they blamed on COVID whenever it came up.
Right.
But mysteriously, they hadn't been doing inventory audits for 3 years. And then all of a sudden they go, oh, there's 63,000 bottles missing. I guess we should probably look into this. Why haven't we sold as many bottles as we thought we were going to sell? It seems like a pretty crazy story.
Yeah, it is. And the funny thing is, I don't imagine that even my buddy at Lone Star Liquor would lose 62 bottles, right? The people don't like the profit motive for lots of different reasons, but I'll tell you what, the profit motive is pretty strong when you're trying to take care of your own liquor that you got to sell. And when somebody else is taking care of it, and it doesn't matter whether it sells or not, I don't pay attention to it. So that was one story I saw.
Somebody in Michigan is drinking a lot of bourbon right now. I don't know who it is, but somebody in Michigan's storing it up.
I don't want to accuse the bourbon junkies of anything, but maybe there's where it all went. Or
that's
actually, I don't know if you heard their story, the bourbon junkie story. They won one of their junkies, one of their fans had won a barrel pick of Eagle Rare, and they gave it to them. And so they went to the Buffalo Trace, did the whole barrel pick, did the whole thing, and got the barrel, got it bottled, put the labels on, and they were kind of waiting for where was the bottle, where was the barrel, and this was on one of their YouTube videos maybe 2-3 weeks ago. And apparently the bottle got shipped to a liquor store. I think it was in New Jersey, but it was on the East Coast. And somebody took a picture and posted it on Facebook, said, look at this bottle of Eagle Rare I got, store pick. And somebody said, that looks like the Bourbon Junkie sticker. And so the Bourbon Junkies looked into it. The owner and the manager of the store said, I don't know how it got here. They just brought me these cases of a single barrel, with the barrel, by the way, with their signatures on it and their number on it. And said, no, it's our barrel. And kind of got indignant with them. And I think, long story short, they got the bourbon back. But and I think they got, some, obviously they didn't get all the bottles back because a bunch of them were sold, but they got a good chunk of them back. So that was an interesting story. But kind of more on the government one is, one of the things that was really cool, a lot of people liked in COVID, was direct to consumer shipping of liquor. Right, especially if you live in a place like Virginia where you can't find things, getting direct ship to from stores is really cool. And now people have decided, and usually for the don't you care about the children reasons, that the direct to consumer market is now causing a problem. So you had the South Carolina State Representative Weston Newton was on the House floor when he held up a bottle and said all he had to do was type in his credit card number, and the delivery driver didn't even ask him for an ID. And they went through and talked about the number of, in Texas, the Texas ABC was reported that in the fourth quarter they found 305,000 unreported illegal wine shipments into Texas, which is about 57% of all the wine shipments in a year. And then they went through and showed some stuff about people ordering things. So we're painting this as, oh my God, the children, when I'm an economist, as I said before, and public choice economics tells me that when the government is running a show, they're not worried about the safety of the children. They're worried about their bottom line and their profit. And if we can ship liquor from Michigan or Texas to Virginia, then Virginia loses its cut on the liquor, which is similar to the story we told last time. So never think when they're telling you it's for the kids that it's for the kids. Somebody's got a profit motive in this somewhere, and it's typically the state trying to protect its license. We can talk a little bit more. We've promised, and we'll do this at some point, a little talk on the three-tier system and how the three-tier system protects profits and at the expense of, what, as we say in economics, concentrated benefits and dispersed cost. And we can talk about that at some point. A real quick idea of concentrated benefits and dispersed cost is, you ever been out to dinner with a bunch of buddies and you decide to split the check beforehand?
Of course.
We all do it, right? And we'll split the check beforehand. Well, if you were going to pay for your own and you looked at that pour of lot B and it was going to be $80 and you're like, I don't know, maybe I don't know 80, but hey, there's 10 of us out here. If I order it, I only got to pay $8 and we're going to split it all anyway. What are you going to do? Yeah, I'll just get that pour. And I really wasn't going to get the ribeye, but I was going to go with the sirloin, but the ribeye's $70 and the sirloin's $40. But you know what? I'm only paying for 1/8 of it, so screw it. And then what happens is everybody ends up paying for a lot more because everybody orders things, and that's the nature of these things in government. If I ain't paying for it, I'll take it, right? So yep. That's part of the lesson we can talk about a little bit later when we talk about those things. So that's what I've been reading. That's what's kind of showed up. There's been some other things. We're putting together a session for an economics conference coming up, and my former student who's still working on the Bottled in Bond Act is going to present a paper. And I showed him the podcast, told him I want to come on. So we're lining up some guests for when my baseball season ends and we have a little more time. I'm lining up a whole bunch of series of guests. I know we keep promising them, but eventually I think, well, you saw the first one today, the youngest bourbon sniffer on the planet. What's that smell like? Bourbon. Well, he gave us popcorn. So that's new. That's a new one for us.
Yeah, that's not bad. Quick pause, Tony. Angie's going to fucking kill you if you don't stop clicking your pen.
Oh, shit. I'm sorry.
She's over here pulling out her hair about the pen clicking. I've been so distracted. She's over here. She's put it in the script. Like,
you should have just told me. I didn't see it. I don't see it. I don't see it going down. I'm looking at the chat. Oh, here it is. Stop clicking your pen.
Oh, God.
I'm sorry. I thought about it once or twice. All right, we'll go back and I'll apologize for that. Hang on.
Not to laugh so hard, but Angie.
Wait, hang on. So let's go back into it and I'll apologize. Sorry about the pen clicking. The class just yelled at the teacher for clicking his pen. This is the problem of being ADHD, drinking bourbon, reading stuff on the internet, talking about baseball, talking about 27 other things. My hand had a pen in it because we were giving, again, the shout out to Lone Star Liquor because it was on the pen and I was clicking that like it was my job. So for all of you ADHD guys that are losing your mind over my clicking the pen, I apologize for that because those of you who heard it know who I'm talking to. Those of you who didn't have no idea what I'm talking about. So I apologize for that.
Yeah, if someone didn't notice and they go back and listen to it now, they're going to wonder how they could have possibly not heard the pen clicking while you were doing that.
And all the ADHD guys online, they've turned this off already. So maybe they'll turn it back on. I apologize to them. Holy
Maybe they're
shit.
done fast forwarding by now and they're back to listening to the podcast, hopefully.
Holy shit. I'm sorry.
Oh, that was funny. But let's learn a little bit about your trip to Louisville. I know we talked about earlier. I know we want to hear some of the distilleries that you went to, see if you found any good bourbon while you were there, maybe if you had any good bourbon stories while you were over there on the Holy Bourbon Trail.
Yeah, my trip to Louisville was great, except for one small problem. When I got there, what I was supposed to do at 3:00 in the afternoon got moved to 1:00 in the afternoon. So I was staying in Louisville, and I was going to get up early, bright and early, drive down to Bardstown, go down through Jim Beam. Going to hit Jim Beam. Going to hit the Four Roses bottling plant. So Claremont to the Four Roses into Bardstown. I was going to go to Lux Row. I think they open at 9:30. Bardstown's at 10. Old Barton's at 10. Willett was at 10, and then I was going to go over to Heaven Hill and then down to very old St. Nick. I can't remember the name of their little effort there. And I had all of this planned out, and I was coming home with like no money, and damn if my thing didn't get moved to 1:00. So I was like, shh, nuts! I can't go to Bardstown. So I ended up, and my hotel was a mile from Barrow, and I got into Louisville, my hotel late, like 9:00 or something. I was kind of bummed out that I wasn't going to get up. So I said, okay, there's a liquor store back across the interstate here. Let me go over there. I walked in, and it was like your typical, it's so great to be in a liquor store that's not in an ABC state. Every inch of space is filled with liquor because the real estate is valuable, right? So and I walk in, and they got a special on Stag Junior, and I think what I got was the B23, or I think I can look it up. I don't remember exactly, but I was like, oh, they have a special on that. It was on sale. I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. And I turned around, and they had an Old Forester single barrel. I was like, I'll take that. And so I drowned my sorrow. I had a couple of sips that night, was practicing calling balls and strikes with my Oculus, and it's kind of hard with that's on to drink, but I managed to sip my bourbon and call balls and strikes at the same time. I'm not sure how I did it on my Oculus, but so that was kind of a good start. Then I sit in the hotel, and I'm like, all right, I can't go. Where can I go? Let me look. I was thinking about Barrel. Turns out Barrel is a mile and a half from the hotel. I go over to Barrel, and it's like in like warehouses and stuff, and you drive up and you ring the bell. It's a ring doorbell, literally a ring doorbell. And I can't remember her name. She told me, and I didn't write it down, and I'm old, so I forgot. I walk in, and it's just like a showroom full of, I think nearly every barrel batch they've done was there, and I was twitching because I'm like, man, I'm missing that one and that one and that one. It was like we said, adult Pokemon. I'm freaking out. I go, oh no, I can't do that. So I ended up buying a barrel 34, a barrel 35, and then I got a gray label at retail, like $150. And we talked a little bit, and I asked her to, told her about my collection, showed her my collection, told her about the podcast, told her about that. She was pretty cool with all that. We talked a little bit. She ended up throwing in a Glencairn glass for me and a nice barrel bourbon carry bag for my road trips. And then, for those of you guys can see this, I got this beautiful tasting tray from, not as good as the Scout made, because the Scout made some pretty good homemade ones. This one's pretty good.
That one's pretty good, though.
And it's not made with the same love as yours was.
That one's pretty good, though.
And it's full of tasting notes, and it comes from a shout out to the Bourbon Trading Company. I guess we could put a little link to them in the show notes. But and it's etched with their barrel craft list on it, and then it has tasting notes from tannic out to earthy, and little notes all the way, and from fresh oak out to microbiological oak. I guess that's oak that's been rotted in the ground for a while, and I hope I don't have to taste that. Little things about spicy, woody, sweet, vanilla, toasty, and nice little toasting notes. A beautiful tray. I saw that, and I threw that in there, and walked out of there with 3 barrels and a glass and a bottle. And if you're ever in I forget the name, it's just west of, I think it's Shelbyville, I think is where it is. Just east of Louisville, about 10 miles east of Louisville on 64. Go to the Barrel Warehouse. They got everything in their little showroom. You ring a bell and you tell her what she wants. She goes in the back and gets it. So that was pretty cool. And we talked about some things, and they had some other pretty cool things there. And so then what I did was I headed in, and it was raining. So I headed into Louisville and in the rain, and got on a scooter, a Bird scooter or a Lime scooter or one of those, and the boomer figured out how to read the QR code, put the money in, and ride around on a scooter. So I shot out from, I was over there by the Yum Center was where I parked, I think, and I got on the scooter and went to the Evan Williams Bourbon Experience, and bought a Glencairn glass there, and ran into a couple of Evan Williams single barrels, one of which I gave to the scout, and picked that up. And because those are not available anywhere but in Kentucky, and they actually had a pretty good selection. They had some stuff there that you don't find very much, and they had it at retail. I'm trying to remember. I don't think there was anything. They might have had the Larceny barrel proof there too. I don't recall, but I didn't get a lot there because I was riding the scooter, and so I had to go from there. I went over to Peerless, and which is a fun place to go. Nice bunch of people, great in there. And I got a Peerless High Rye, which I think I put some toasting notes. That might show up sometime. Really kind of spicy, really good, really dark, really rich. I really enjoyed that. And that's when I went to Bardstown, and I got the 3 Bardstown. I went into the Bardstown tasting experience and spent some time talking with those guys, and those guys are great. I can't say enough nice things about Bardstown, the Bardstown tasting experience. So shout out to them, and hashtag Bardstown Bourbon Company. Go there if you get a chance. And then I ended up going over to Michter's. I went into Michter's. I was the 2 guys in front of me got the last Michter barrel pour your own. I missed it by 2 people. And so I was a little bit bummed out at that. Got on my scooter, rode back in the rain, dropped off some stuff, parked over across the street from Doc Crow's. If you're ever in Louisville, Doc Crow's, great Southern food, good barbecue, and a bourbon selection that will knock your socks off. You can walk through their museum. It is pretty incredible. In fact, you can eat in their museum, and we did. And then before we went to Doc Crow's that night, we went. I went over to Justin's House of Bourbon, and it took me a while to pry a story out of them. But we were talking. There was a couple other guys talking. They were talking about some other things, and I kind of finally pried the story out. There, I bought an old Carter 8-year, their own single barrel, which was marvelous. And I remember. I wish I could remember his name. I pried him a little bit. He didn't want to talk much about it, but then he finally come out and he goes, "We won 3 times." That's what he said. "We won 3 times." And I was like, okay. And I kept prodding him. And it turns out what's really interesting is the commissioner, and again, this goes back to the economics of things and this direct to consumer. That's where they got in some trouble, and they're Dusties, because I said it was terrible what they did to their bottles. And he said, "We won 3 times. And we talked about this before. And he said that interestingly enough, not only did they come after Justin's House of Bourbon, they also came after Doc Crow's, and they came after the Bardstown Bourbon Festival for the same sort of things. So I was really surprised at that. I said, "Doc Crow's?" And he goes, "Yeah." And then there was one other place I can't remember. And it turns out that the head of the Kentucky ABC that was doing those things and charging those things works for a distillery. So I wonder if the government is protecting a distiller against possible sales of things. And it turns out I don't want to say which distillery. We'll leave it at that. We can look it up. You can look it up. But it turns out she's on the payroll of a distillery, a major distillery, a big, like, worldwide distillery. And so that was a really interesting story. And he said multiple times, he said, all I know is we won 3 times, and we're going to win again, and we're going to keep winning. So they're beating back those charges pretty well. And it was an interesting 5-10 minute conversation. There was a couple other guys there, and they were talking about the horse soldier guys, and they did a barrel pour with the horse soldier guys, and said those guys were great. Although they were talkative, they enjoyed to listen to talk. They're like, when you talk with those guys, you don't get a 15-minute, 20-minute thing. You're going to be hunkering down for an hour. And they said some really nice things about the horse soldier guys. So that was a really interesting story. And then that night we went to Doc Crow's, and Doc Crow's now has its own barrel picks, which is kind of cool. And I had a Russell's Reserve barrel pick from Doc Crow's with my dinner, with the salmon, which was just cooked beautifully. And the whole meal was phenomenal. Again, shout out to Doc Crow's. And that Russell's Reserve single barrel was good enough. I bought a barrel and brought it home with me, or bottle and brought it home with me. So that was a real, the Louisville trip was a lot of fun. Even though I couldn't get to Bardstown and tour around Bardstown, just made me want to go back some more. So I can't wait for the next trip with the scout and the class and silly dilly to the Bourbon Trail.
Yeah, I think we're about overdue for a trip that's specifically planned around the Bourbon Trail. I know it's nice that work took you out to Louisville, but obviously it kind of messed with your schedule, being able to check out some of the distilleries and things like that. But I think we're about due to take a Professor Bourbon trip to the Bourbon Trail, maybe do an episode or 2 from there, get some content from the trail itself. I think would be a lot of fun. But before we wrap up today, I guess we wanted to do a little econ lesson and just talk real quickly about transaction costs versus secondary pricing. I know we talk about secondary versus MSRP here a whole lot. We've already gone into what secondary pricing means, finding bottles either on a Facebook group or your friend down the street that's willing to sell it to you that they've already purchased at a marked up price. So Professor Bourbon, tell us a little bit more about transaction costs versus these secondary prices themselves.
Okay, so in economics, there's a concept of transaction costs, which once upon a time we called shoe leather cost. So anytime you buy something, it takes time and effort to make the transaction happen. So if you're going to buy, a bottle of bourbon at the liquor store, you got to drive to the liquor store, you got to walk into the liquor store, you got to pick the bottle up, and you got to pay for it. All of that is part of the price of the bourbon, right? That's really easy. You might know, for example, gas up the street might be $3.20 a gallon, but 10 miles up the road, it might be $3.05 a gallon. Most people go, I ain't driving an extra 10 miles to save a dime. I'll use that much in gas. So that's kind of the idea of transactions cost. Any transaction you make requires some sort of cost, not necessarily dollar signs, but at least effort and shoe leather cost. So when you're buying bourbon, it's one of the things we talk about in Virginia. If we have a product drop's going to happen and people know, say on a Saturday morning, there are guys that will start camping out at 4, 5, 3, 2 midnight the night before and sleep on the sidewalk and stuff in the hopes of getting a birthday bourbon, in hopes of getting the I lost it again, the green one from Heaven Hill in the flask, in the decanter.
Old Fitz.
Thank you. The old Fitz in the decanter. I have a buddy who actually got one of those here, but he had to get there at like 4 o'clock in the morning and sleep on the sidewalk. So 4 o'clock and sleep on the sidewalk. There's a lot of hours invested in buying that. That's all part of the transaction cost. Yeah, the price, he got it to buy it for $120, but he spent 8 hours of his time. So one of the ways to think about a secondary market is I just paid him to wait in line. So if I buy it from him at $300, I didn't have to wait 8 hours in line. I had to wait no time in line, and I got the bourbon. So as the economist Mike Munger, a friend of mine, teaches at Duke University, says that to customers or consumers, all costs are transaction costs. It doesn't matter how much. If the bottle is $100 and it takes me $100 to get there, it's a $200 bottle of liquor. So you don't think of it that way, and people instinctually understand that. Like, I'm not going to drive past this Publix to buy half and half it for a nickel cheaper 5 miles down the road, because part of the price is transaction cost. And we know that, like, I might buy something a little more expensive at this grocery store than another because I like this grocery store, and I'm not going to make 17 trips to save a nickel on every trip. And that's the nature of transaction cost. And that really matters in secondary markets. So secondary markets, we can be upset at secondary markets, but for a guy like me that lives in a ABC state, I look at secondary markets as somebody else waited for in line for me somewhere else. And I got to, and they did it for me. Would I like to have a bottle of Old Rip 10 at retail? Of course I would. But that means I got to hit the Virginia lottery right at the right time, be there at midnight, sleep on the sidewalk, wake up in the morning, and hope to God I'm the first guy in, and hope to God that's what they have. I'd rather go spend $200 or $300 on the secondary, and if it turns out it's $500, I go, I wouldn't sleep on the sidewalk either. So when we think about secondary pricing and you think about secondary markets, think about you're paying somebody else to wait in line for you, and now you get it like that. That's the beauty of Amazon. Why do people love Amazon? No transaction cost. I click on my thing, and the thing ends up at my door. Now, way out here where I live, I'm not nice, and you call yourself rural, but you can throw a rock and hit Atlanta. I'm like really rural. I don't get 2-day delivery on Amazon anymore. I order something, they go, yeah, I might make it by Friday if I order it on Monday, and if I'm lucky. But those are all part of transaction cost, and just like Amazon does really cool things for us, we may not like the secondary market, but that's part of what it does for us. But those are the trade-offs inherent in exchange.
Yeah, I think it's important to kind of approach the secondary market from that angle. A lot of people like to just sit and complain about it and say that it's just people that are flipping bottles. It's just a way for people to make money. If people would stop buying them at secondary, then they'd be more available at MSRP. And like you said, some of those transaction costs, it's not just the mileage that you put in or the time that it took you to get there, sleeping on the sidewalk. Some of it's building a relationship with the store owner. That takes time and money that you don't see. A lot of these people that are posting these bottles they're getting at MSRP have spent a fortune at these liquor stores with these owners to be getting those phone calls to be like, hey, I have this here. I'm willing to give it to you at MSRP. There's been a transaction cost that was built into that. And the fact that he's selling it on secondary, while it might make you mad, it also makes a bottle available that a lot of people would have no other option of ever getting. So while you might be upset that there's a secondary price for it and you don't want to pay it, for some people, especially people like you that live in an ABC state, there's certain bottles that you'll never see unless you pay that secondary price. And once you factor in a lot of those transaction costs, I feel like it can really be worth it. And some of those secondary pricing starts to make a lot of sense.
No, and that's a good way to put it. And for those of you who are sitting wondering, and the Scout helps me develop a lot of relationships down there in some liquor stores. That's why we shouted out the Tap House and shout out Georgia World of Beverage and Peachtree, right? Shout out those guys. That's Justin, is that right?
Scott's at Georgia World of Beverage and Pre is at Tap House Liquor, and they've both done very well by us and taken care of us with some really good bottles.
And we have done well by them, and we're never, just so in case anybody's wondering whether we're flipping stuff, I have never flipped a bottle of bourbon. If I buy it, I keep it, or I give it to somebody and I drink it. So of the 415 bottles we have here, the only ones that aren't open are the ones I've gotten since March, and there haven't been enough days in the week to open them all yet. So we're slowly working our way through that. But for those of you guys that don't like the secondary market, I'm going to be a player in it on the buyer end because it keeps me from sleeping on the street, but I'm not turning around and flipping stuff. So my collection's a little bit different in that regard, and I'm not going to be mad at secondary markets because they allow me to get stuff. So it's a double-edged sword, right?
Yeah, it's definitely a double-edged sword, but I think it's a necessary evil if you want to call it an evil. for most people. And I think most people would still appreciate the fact that that's an available option they have for certain bottles. So if you find something on the secondary market that you think is worth it to you and worth those transaction costs, pull the trigger on it, try it. If you have the option to try it at one of your local bars, I'd highly recommend doing that before paying some ridiculous secondary prices, because there are going to be some of those bottles I feel that you try and that just don't quite live up to that hype.
And as you know, on secondary market, they can ask what they want, but we've made some pretty good deals. We rounded out our little book collection the other day for a pretty good price, and we rounded out another collection of something for a pretty good price. You know, on secondary, you can offer like I said, the guy offered me to sell this at that price, and you know, it's one of the things we were talking about, the 13th colony. That 13th colony anniversary came out, and before anybody even tried it, it was up to what, $800 a bottle. I imagine that price has settled down a little bit at this point. I haven't looked recently.
It has, yeah. It finally has come down to what you could quote a normal level, but it's still in the $400 to $500 range. And when it was first released, before anyone had ever tasted it, because of how popular their other product, their double oaked release that they had, it was already selling for $800, $900, and no one had pulled the plastic off of their bottle yet, which is just crazy. And we can kind of get into some of that in a later episode about how wild just the reputation of a bourbon, I feel like, can make the secondary pricing. But like you said, that 13th colony, the 15th anniversary that came out, that was a pretty shocking secondary explosion without anyone having tasted the bourbon.
Yeah, that was one of the ones you can point at and kind of go, what the heck? But we can talk about, like I said, I think maybe another time we can have a little lesson on the tulip bubble in the Dutch tulip bubble in the 15th century, because there's nothing new under the sun. We've seen it all before, and it's happened before. So remember, there's a great economist won a Nobel Prize about transactions costs. He says I lost the quote. I'm gonna stop. I'll mess it up. I had it in my head, and I can't remember what it was, and it just flew right out. And well,
that's
maybe
a combination of bourbon and age right there.
Right,
just
bourbon and age, and lots of storytelling, and maybe this one was a complete shit show with the pen clicking. Stop your damn pen clicking, right? And I think the outro on this is quit clicking the fucking pen.
Quit clicking that damn pen. But I think that the economy side of bourbon and transaction cost, secondary pricing, this is kind of the subjects that we're looking forward to diving into deeper in the future. I know a few of our early episodes were kind of covering the basics of bourbon, but I'm really looking forward to kind of tackling some more off the wall subjects with bourbon, not necessarily your standard, what is a mash bill, what's an aging process, really getting into some of the history of bourbon and how it affects current economics and things like that. So I know we have some cool stuff coming up in some other episodes, but for tonight, I think that's just about going to wrap us up. Do you have anything else for us, Professor Bourbon?
No, just remember, like, follow, subscribe, get us in your algorithms. Look at the TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. The podcast is available on Apple, Spotify, YouTube. Find us, like us, subscribe to us, and leave us a comment. Let us know if there's something you'd like to hear about in economics, or something that pisses you off, and maybe I can find a way to show you why it shouldn't piss you off, just because that's what I do.
There we go. I like that. Yeah, let's find stuff that pisses you off that Professor Bourbon can explain why maybe it shouldn't piss you off. I like that.
Hopefully it won't be another month. Until then,
it will not. It will not.
Until then, sip bourbon. Class dismissed. Well, I stopped clicking the goddamn pen.